Welcome, dear listener, to another journey back in time, where the whispers of history await to envelop you in their gentle embrace. Tonight, we travel to a medieval village on the cusp of winter, where the rhythm of life moves in harmony with nature's unforgiving cycles. As the golden light of autumn begins to fade, we'll discover how our ancestors prepared for the harshest season of all, a time that tested the very limits of human endurance and community bonds. This tale is crafted especially for those moments when you seek respite from our modern world, when you wish to close your eyes and drift into the soothing currents of the past. Let the soft cadence of historical narrative carry you toward peaceful slumber, or simply provide a moment of tranquil reflection in your busy day. I'm always curious to know where in our vast world you're listening from. Perhaps you're settling in for the evening as darkness falls, or maybe you're seeking a midday escape from the hustle of contemporary life. Please share in the comments where you are and what time it is in your corner of the world. I find such joy in seeing our community gather across distances and time zones, united by our appreciation for these quiet moments with history. If these journeys into the past bring you comfort or fascination, consider subscribing so you won't miss future tales from distant times. Each story is a doorway to another era, waiting to welcome you whenever you need a gentle retreat from the present. Now, let us leave behind the electric lights and digital hum of our modern existence. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to wander back 800 years to a small village nestled between ancient forests and rolling fields, where the first chill winds of autumn carry whispers of the winter to come. The morning mist hung low over the fields as Thomas and his family made their way along the narrow path, their breath forming small clouds in the increasingly crisp air. "Hurry now," Thomas called to his children, his calloused hands gripping a worn sickle. "Every sheaf we gather today is a day without hunger come Candlemas." His wife Agnes nodded grimly as she adjusted the rough hemp sack slung across her shoulder, her eyes scanning the sky where gray clouds gathered on the northern horizon. Their 3 children followed behind, even little Matilda of 6 summers, carrying a small basket for gleaning any fallen grain they might find. The harvest race had begun in earnest throughout the village of Thornfield. From the first light of dawn until dusk claimed the land, families worked with silent determination across the open fields. The Lord's portion had been collected first, as was custom and law, but now the peasants labored for their own survival. Thomas watched as his eldest son, William, swung his sickle with increasing skill, the boy's 12-year-old frame already showing the promise of a man's strength. "The barley seems thinner this year," Agnes murmured, as she bundled the cut stalks, tying them with practiced efficiency. "And the rye has that blackness again at the edges of the field." "We'll have enough," Thomas assured her, though uncertainty shadowed his eyes. "The peas did well, and the turnips are larger than last harvest." He didn't mention the rumors that had spread through the village after old Martha, who had lived through 63 winters, had examined the thickness of the woolly caterpillars and the height of the hornets' nests in the forest. "Winter comes early and stays late this year," she had proclaimed at the village well 3 days past. "Mark my words." As the sun climbed higher, casting weak warmth across their backs, the family worked methodically through their strip of land. In the distance, smoke rose from the great manor house where Lord Geoffrey's servants were equally busy with preservation work. Agnes paused to wipe sweat from her brow, despite the cool air. "They say the cellars beneath the manor are already filled with salted meats and barrels of apples," she said, watching as a cart laden with firewood trundled along the road toward the stone walls. "And Father Ambrose has the monastery brothers collecting honey and pressing cider day and night." "The wise prepare while the sun still shines," Thomas replied, repeating his father's oft-spoken wisdom. He straightened his aching back and gazed across the patchwork of fields where dozens of families mirrored their urgent labor. Beyond the cultivated land, The forest stood as a dark line against the horizon, its leaves already turning to flame-bright colors that signaled summer's definitive end. William, take your brother to check the snares before midday. We'll need every rabbit and squirrel we can smoke before the first frost. In the village center, Elder Cedric had called a council beneath the ancient oak tree. As the sun reached its zenith, the men gathered to hear his observations while women continued the preservation work in open cook fires and drying racks, constructed outside their humble dwellings. The oak has dropped its acorns earlier than I've seen in 20 years, the white-bearded elder announced, his voice carrying the weight of experience. The birds fly south in larger flocks, and the deer come closer to the village than is their wont. He pointed to the distant mountains where a dusting of white already capped the highest peaks. These are not good signs. We must prepare for a winter harsher than most can remember. Lord Geoffrey, a fair-minded nobleman who had inherited the manor 5 years prior, stood among the villagers rather than above them. The tithe barns are full, he assured them, and I've ordered additional firewood to be collected from the fallen trees in the North Forest. Though he didn't say it aloud, he knew that a starving peasantry would be of no use when spring planting came. Better to ensure some measure of survival for all than to hoard everything behind manor walls. As the week progressed, the village transformed into a hive of preservation activity. Outside each humble cottage, women boiled fruits for preserves, packed root vegetables in sand-filled barrels, and hung herbs from rafters to dry. Children gathered nuts from the forest edge, while men smoked meat and fish over carefully tended fires. Inside Thomas and Agnes's cottage, bundles of dried beans hung from the ceiling beams, and precious salt, purchased at dear cost from the spring market, was used sparingly to preserve what meat they had managed to acquire. The final market day before winter's arrival brought the surrounding villages together in a flurry of last-minute trading. Thomas and Agnes arrived early, bringing their carefully crafted wooden bowls and spoons to trade for additional grain. The marketplace buzzed with activity and anxious energy as villagers exchanged not only goods, but information, the most valuable currency of all. Make way for Master Fletcher," called a young boy running ahead of a heavily laden cart pulled by a weary mule. The arrival of the traveling merchant caused an immediate stir. Giles Fletcher, known throughout the region for his journeys between distant towns, brought not only rare goods, but news from afar. "Greetings, good people of Thornfield," he called, his voice hoarse from many days on the road. "I bring salt from the coast, iron needles from the city, and news you should hear." The villagers gathered close as he described the early blizzards that had already blanketed the northern kingdoms. "Snow fell before the harvest was complete," he said solemnly. "Many will not see spring in those lands." Agnes clutched Thomas's arm, her face pale beneath her linen head covering. "We must trade for more grain," she whispered urgently. Thomas nodded, mentally calculating what they could spare from their meager possessions. Across the marketplace, similar conversations took place as families made difficult decisions about what to trade and what to keep. A woman exchanged her cherished brass brooch, a wedding gift, for a sack of dried peas. An old man traded a finely carved walking stick for tallow candles that would provide precious light during the long, dark months ahead. As the sun began its early descent, casting long shadows across the marketplace, the villagers made their final transactions with increasing urgency. Children were sent home with precious bundles, while parents continued to barter. "The first frost will come tonight," predicted Elder Cedric, studying the clarity of the afternoon sky. "Those who are not prepared now will not have another chance." Lord Geoffrey's steward moved through the crowd, quietly noting which families seemed most vulnerable, marking them for possible assistance when the worst of winter arrived. Thomas and Agnes walked home in the fading light, their sack heavier with additional grain, but their hearts heavy with apprehension. Behind them, the marketplace slowly emptied as families returned to their homes, pulling shutters tight and banking fires that would need to burn continuously for months to come. In the distance, the first flock of wild geese flew southward, their mournful calls echoing across the darkening landscape, harbingers of the long, brutal season that would soon envelop the medieval world in its merciless embrace. The first snow fell 3 days after the market, earlier than anyone had anticipated. By the following week, the world outside had transformed into an unforgiving white wasteland. Inside their small cottage, Agnes wrapped another layer of woolen cloth around her infant daughter, Matilda, whose tiny face had grown pale in the biting cold that seeped through the mud-daubed walls. The baby's cries had weakened over the past day, a change that frightened Agnes more than the howling wind outside. "Thomas," she called to her husband, who was carefully feeding twigs into their dwindling fire. "The babe won't warm. I fear for her." Agnes pressed her lips to Matilda's forehead, finding the skin cool despite the layers of fabric. Their cottage, usually sufficient for the milder winters they had known, now seemed as porous as a fishing net against the relentless cold. Thomas looked up from the hearth, his face drawn with worry. "I've been adding smaller pieces to make the wood last longer," he explained, his breath visible in the frigid air. "But at this rate our store will be gone before Candlemas." He glanced toward the corner, where their carefully stacked firewood had already diminished to half its original size. The brutal cold had forced them to burn through their supplies at an alarming rate, and the winter had only just begun. Agnes moved closer to the meager flames, cradling Matilda against her chest. "Perhaps we could bring the goat inside tonight," she suggested, thinking of the animal's body heat. "And maybe we should all sleep near the hearth rather than on the bedding platform." The platform, raised slightly off the ground to avoid the worst of the draft, had proven insufficient against this particular cold. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted further. Thomas brought their goat inside, the animal's presence adding both warmth and the pungent smell of livestock to their single-room dwelling. They pushed their sleeping pallets directly beside the fire pit, banking the coals carefully to last through the night without setting their home ablaze. A delicate balance between the dangers of cold and fire that every household navigated during winter. Throughout the village of Thornfield, similar scenes played out in dozens of cottages. The unprecedented cold had caught many families unprepared, their carefully calculated wood supplies proving woefully inadequate. By morning, 2 elderly villagers who lived alone had been found frozen in their beds, their fires extinguished during the night. The news spread quickly, carried by children sent to check on neighbors, adding fresh terror to an already frightened community. Within the stone walls of Lord Geoffrey's manor, the situation was different but not without its own perils. Lady Eleanor moved through the great hall, ordering servants to hang additional tapestries over windows and doorways to block the murderous drafts. Despite the roaring fires in every hearth, moisture collected in corners and along northern walls, creating slick patches of ice on stone floors and perfect conditions for the black mold that soon began creeping across the ceiling of the lesser-used chambers. "My lord," the steward reported one morning as Geoffrey broke his fast, "3 of the kitchen boys have fallen ill with chest ailments, and the dampness in the east wing has ruined 2 barrels of grain." He hesitated before adding, "And there are reports from the village of children with fever and coughing sickness." Geoffrey nodded grimly. The castle, for all its imposing strength against human enemies, battled its own war against winter's silent weapons: dampness, mold, and the illnesses they bred. "Have the physician prepare remedies of honey and herbs," he ordered, "and move everyone from the east wing to warmer quarters." Back in the village, Agnes woke to find Matilda burning with fever, her previously cool skin now alarmingly hot. The baby's breathing came in labored gasps, each inhalation a visible struggle. "Thomas!" she cried out, panic rising in her throat. "The babe! She's taken ill!" Thomas immediately set out for the monastery, trudging through knee-deep snow to seek help from Brother Marcus, known for his healing skills. The journey, normally a brief walk, took him nearly 2 hours in the treacherous conditions. By the time he returned with the monk, Agnes had been joined by 3 neighboring women, all offering different remedies, passed down through generations. Steam from pine needles for the breathing, suggested one, while another recommended a poultice of garlic. Brother Marcus gently moved them aside, examining the infant with practiced hands before preparing a mixture of honey, crushed herbs, and warm water. "This will ease her breathing," he explained, carefully administering tiny amounts to the struggling child. "But many are falling ill. The damp and cold create perfect conditions for lung ailments." As January deepened, the situation grew dire throughout Thornfield. The village's food stores, meant to last until spring, dwindled at an alarming rate as people consumed more to generate body heat against the persistent cold. Lord Geoffrey, seeing the growing crisis, organized a hunting party of his strongest men, hoping to supplement the community's provisions with fresh meat. After 3 days in the frozen forest, the hunters returned empty-handed. The animals, like humans, were struggling to survive the brutal winter, and many had either migrated or perished. The party had found only frozen carcasses of deer, too emaciated to provide meaningful sustenance. That evening, Geoffrey paced before the great hall's fire, his face troubled as he consulted with his steward and the village elder, Cedric. "The people will starve before spring arrives," Cedric stated plainly, his weathered face grave. "Already there are families mixing sawdust with their flour to make it last longer." Geoffrey stopped his pacing, coming to a difficult decision. "Open the manor's grain stores," he commanded his steward. "Distribute a portion to each household according to their need. And prepare the great hall. We shall host a midwinter feast for all of Thornfield." The steward's eyes widened. "My lord, if we share our stores now, then we shall all face hunger together later if need be," Geoffrey interrupted firmly. "Better that than watching children starve while grain sits in our storerooms." 3 days later, as the winter sun made a rare appearance through leaden clouds, the people of Thornfield gathered in the manor's great hall. The feast was modest by peacetime standards, but seemed like unimaginable luxury to villagers who had been rationing every morsel. For one blessed afternoon, the community ate together, sharing warmth, food, and a momentary respite from winter's grip. As Thomas and Agnes sat with Matilda, now recovering though still weak, Agnes caught Lord Geoffrey's eye across the hall and nodded her silent gratitude. The winter was far from over, and greater challenges lay ahead, but in this moment of shared humanity, a spark of hope flickered, as vital to survival as the fires they all struggled to maintain. The monastery of St. Cuthbert's, which had stood on the hillside overlooking Thornfield for over 3 centuries, transformed during the harshest days of winter. What had once been primarily a place of prayer became the beating heart of community survival. Brother Marcus, having treated little Matilda and several other villagers suffering from winter ailments, recognized that the monastery's role must extend beyond spiritual guidance. "We have knowledge in these walls that must be shared if we are to see spring again," he announced to the abbot one morning after prayers, his breath visible in the frigid chapel air. By the following week, the monastery's large undercroft had been cleared of stored vegetables and transformed into what the brothers called the winter workshop. Word spread through the village, and soon, despite the knee-deep snow, villagers trudged up the winding path to the monastery gates. Thomas was among the first to arrive, carrying a broken plow blade wrapped in burlap. The metal cracked in the cold, he explained to Brother Aldwin, the monastery's skilled blacksmith. Without it, spring planting becomes impossible. Brother Aldwin nodded gravely, his weathered hands examining the fractured metal. Many tools will fail in such cold, but God has blessed us with knowledge passed down through generations. He gestured around the undercroft where several monks had set up stations, one for metalwork, another for woodcraft, a third for weaving and textile repair, and a fourth where Brother Marcus mixed medicines from dried herbs stored since summer. We will teach what we know, and together we will endure. The monastery's winter workshop quickly established a rhythm. Each morning, villagers would arrive with broken tools, torn clothing, or ailments that needed attention. Rather than simply fixing these problems, the monks insisted on teaching. Watch carefully, Brother Aldwin told Thomas and 3 other farmers, as he demonstrated how to temper metal properly for cold conditions. The secret lies in heating it evenly before the quenching. Too fast, and it becomes brittle in the frost. The farmers observed intently, their calloused hands eventually taking turns at the bellows and hammer under the monk's patient guidance. In another corner, elderly Sister Agnes, no relation to Thomas's wife, had journeyed from the nearby convent to teach the village women techniques for spinning and weaving that required minimal light, a precious commodity during the short winter days. Your fingers must learn to feel what your eyes cannot see, she instructed, as women practiced by the dim light of tallow candles. This is how our ancestors wove during the darkest winters, when even nobles could not afford to burn candles through the night. Lord Geoffrey himself visited the workshop frequently, setting aside the usual divisions between nobility and commoners. He brought with him ancient farming texts from his library, preserved from Roman times, which contained forgotten methods for coaxing life from frozen ground. My grandfather's grandfather collected these, he explained as Brother Matthias translated the Latin for the gathered villagers. The wisdom of the ancients may save us where our own knowledge fails. As January gave way to February, the undercroft hummed with activity from dawn until dusk. Children too young to work became messengers, carrying repaired items back to the village and bringing new broken tools up to the monastery. The abbot, initially concerned about disruption to the brothers' spiritual routine, soon recognized the workshop as its own form of devotion. Christ was a carpenter before he was our Savior, he reminded the monks. In teaching these skills, you perform his work. Back in the village, as darkness fell earlier each day, another form of survival took shape within the cramped cottages. Elder Cedric, whose warnings about the harsh winter had proven all too accurate, became the keeper of community memory through his nightly storytelling. In Thomas and Agnes's cottage, now crowded with their own family plus 2 neighboring widows who had moved in to share warmth and resources, Cedric's arrival each evening was eagerly anticipated. "Gather close," the old man would say as he settled on a stool near the central hearth, where Agnes had managed to keep a small fire burning with carefully rationed wood. The single room grew quiet except for the occasional pop from the fire, and Matilda's soft breathing as she slept in her mother's arms. "Tonight, I will tell you of the great frost of our grandfather's time, and how they found food when all seemed lost." Children and adults alike listened intently, as Cedric wove tales that were equal parts history, practical knowledge, and hope. He described forgotten edible roots that could be dug from beneath the snow, methods for tracking winter hares that had been developed during previous famines, and signs in nature that indicated when the thaw would begin. "Look for the red-breasted robin's return," he instructed. "They know before we do when the earth softens." These fireside gatherings served multiple purposes beyond entertainment. Bodies, pressed together, conserved precious heat. while the shared stories strengthened community bonds strained by hunger and cold. Most importantly, they preserved crucial survival knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. My grandmother taught me which tree barks can be ground for flour when grain runs out, one elderly woman contributed after Cedric finished his tale. I will show you all tomorrow if anyone will join me in gathering some. Thomas noticed that Lord Geoffrey occasionally slipped into these gatherings, sitting quietly at the back of different cottages each night, listening to the stories with the same attention as the youngest children. When asked why he came, the Lord replied simply, "These tales contain wisdom my Latin books do not. A lord who does not know how his people survive is no true lord at all." By early March, when winter had stretched beyond what anyone could remember, the first signs of change finally appeared. A morning dawned slightly warmer than the one before, and by midday, water dripped from icicles hanging from the cottage eaves. Children noticed it first, pointing and shouting at this small miracle. Within days, patches of earth began to emerge from beneath the snow blanket that had covered the village since December. The entire community gathered at the edge of the common field one bright morning when someone spotted the first green shoots pushing through the mud, winter rye that had somehow survived beneath the snow. Agnes knelt to touch the tiny sprouts, tears streaming down her face. "Matilda will see spring after all," she whispered to Thomas, who stood beside her with their daughter, now fully recovered, and squirming in his arms. Lord Geoffrey called for an impromptu celebration, ordering barrels of ale brought from the manor cellar. Brother Marcus and several other monks joined the villagers in the field, offering prayers of thanksgiving. The abbot himself blessed the emerging shoots, his voice carrying across the muddy field. As these plants rise from darkness into light, so too does this community rise from winter's trial, stronger in its bonds than before. As villagers shared the ale and the first fresh bread made from the last of the monastery's flour stores, Thomas observed the changed faces around him. Thinner, yes, and bearing new lines of worry, but also showing something that hadn't been there before. A quiet confidence born of shared survival. Children who had learned to repair tools alongside the monks now spoke knowledgeably about metalwork. Women who had mastered night weaving displayed intricate patterns created in darkness. Men discussed plans for spring planting that incorporated ancient techniques from Lord Geoffrey's Roman texts. "We have been forged like Brother Aldwin's plough blades," Elder Cedric announced, raising his cup in a toast that silenced the crowd. Heated by hardship, tempered by community, and strengthened for whatever seasons lie ahead. Winter may come again, but never again will it find us unprepared.